one of the points that, and not so many words that Paul was trying to make. Too many times it's for a selfish reason. What am I going to get out of this? What am I going to get out of this? And that goes to, I'm lost in my own notes.
Well, it's a kind of like I have to win, whether I'm right or wrong.
Yes.
And Paul says if I'm right, I'd rather be considered wrong than win an argument against a saint. So.
Okay, here we go. Correct. When I talked earlier about the conciliation, let's see. Here, not only were the Corinthians unwilling to follow the example of Jesus, but when they did address their grievances, they did so by way of what's called litigation instead of a conciliation. Litigation, you're seeking a redress for grievances. The practical effect of this upon the other party is not the main issue, nor is it typically a concern. Indeed, the effect upon the other party is often meant to be punitive. It is intended to exact some sort of revenge and inflict some sort of punishment upon them. In conciliation, by contrast, you approach the situation knowing that unless both parties see the outcome as some sort of win, then it will not work. So you know that you have to work with the other person and not just beat them in court. You know that you're going to have to try and see things from their side, not just have them see and accept your version of the story. So they're all too often doing litigations instead of conciliation. That's what we need here.
Love for the other person, enemy or saint. You love them and you want the best for them, and you'd rather be hurt than hurt them.
And I think that's the whole thing that Paul's trying to say is when you're dealing with Christians having issues with themselves, we know first and foremost that we're Christians and what God's purpose is. And we need to get together and we need to discuss what is going on. Because we know how God wants things to be. And to take and go with these matters to an outside, to somebody who's an unbeliever that doesn't understand the whole basis behind everything is entirely wrong. And that's why Paul was so upset. Because of the matters that was taking place. It was the trivial, everyday, little tiny matters that really didn't matter at all. And that's why Paul listed examples of Jesus.
I think the main thing we can learn from this is what kind of kingdom God's kingdom is. Basically, I mean, look at any political system. It is essentially an organization of who gets to control who's violent toward whom, and whose selfishness trumps the others, right? That's who. Oh, you can't say that to the king. Why not? He'll kill you, right? Oh, you can't do that. Why not? You'll go to jail and suffer, right? When you question the law in any society, it ends up, well, violence will happen to you if you don't obey. But here, our obedience is not driven by the threat of violence. Our obedience is driven by love for one another and by service toward God, and by the indebtedness we feel toward God's love, not the threat we feel of His wrath. We're called to it's an ultimate repudiation of that retributive justice. That maybe we deserve the wrath of God, but instead of extending that wrath, He's given us grace. He's given us this opportunity to have life in that more abundantly. And so it's completely different from a system in which you would have to go and appeal to some authority to hurt that guy because I don't like him. And then bringing that into the church is a corruption. It's a travesty. It's basically what Paul's pointing out. It's like we escaped that world by coming into this kingdom. You want to bring their stuff into our world? You want to go and appeal to their authority instead of to the authority of God's love and mercy? you're giving up the greatest gift you've been given by the gospel. I think is really what Paul is pointing out, that you found something better and you want to go crawl back in the dirt. You know,
It is not that there's not punishment for us if we don't follow the laws, but as you were saying, and if I understand it correctly, that our motivation is not first and foremost promoted by violence. It's the love that God had for us that He sent His Son. And we should try to love just as much as Jesus did by laying His life on the cross.
Well, when James and John wanted to ask you, hey, we're gonna sit on the right and left hand, he says, no, in the world, they lord it over you. He said, it won't be like that with you guys. He says, the one who would be greatest will be your servant of all. And so you take the servant position. When you have a grievance against a brother, it says, if I lose, I still got a brother. You know?
I want to, since it's been brought up twice now, I'm going to read the passage that was Christian had brought up earlier that Jed referred to. Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 38. It says, "You've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone will sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You've heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you."
Well, if that applies to people in the world, it all applies even more so
To us.
Yeah.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I think, again, that was the anger that Paul was dealing with because of their actions of this petty stuff.
Well, they were selfish.
They were.
They were looking out for themselves.
They had not fully grasped of what it was to be a Christian.
Right? Jesus never took anybody to court.
And like I said earlier, it's easiest for us to sit and read these examples of what took place. But we're talking about the early church. Yes, they had Jesus. Yes, they had all the apostles with them. But it's easy to read this and say, man, you messed up, you messed up, you
Well, they
messed up.
still had a part of the old man still in.
Yes. But by reading these examples, I think it's beneficial as a heed, as a warning.
Yes.
Don't let this happen here. Don't let this happen in today's age. And that's, if we don't take it and learn from it, then we're failing as well. We're no better than the 1 Corinthians. Any comments so far? I'll take all the help I can get. Let's see.
John, I was thinking, at the end of verse 10, after he lists all these sins and says that none of these will inherit God's kingdom, and he's talking to kingdom citizens. And so if their viewpoint is that we are citizens of this heavenly kingdom, not this earthly kingdom, then how we deal with others is going to be for their spiritual good. And not necessarily, like we were saying, these trivial things of life, or, seeking retribution, or, they need to see the error of their ways and, be punished for something that they did against us, but more, how is this going to affect them in their walk with God? or my own, and how, am I holding on to bitterness? Am I holding on to resentment? Am I holding on to, it's like what you were saying about both parties have to win. Well, it's not win in this life, it's win.
Right. I mean, you're damaging your own self
Right.
by holding on to something that you shouldn't even have in the first place. The other that was referred to earlier, in 1 Peter chapter 2, I'll read 19 through 23. For this is a gracious thing, when mindful of God, one endures sorrows while suffering unjustly. For what credit is it if when you sin and are beaten for it, you endure? But if when you do good and suffer for it, you endure. This is a gracious thing in the sight of God. For to this you have been called, because Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example, so that you might follow in his steps. He committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. When he was reviled, he did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly.
Christ is the example.
He is the example.
John, it reminds me of the last couple of verses, I'm sure where you're at exactly, but just the small thing where he says, turn the other cheek. If someone slaps you, turn the other cheek. And it's basically saying, turn the other cheek, and it's also saying, don't slap. Because you said, but you defraud each other. You guys defraud each other. First off, we shouldn't defraud each other.
Right.
And then if someone defrauds you, then you just turn the other cheek.
So that is, as Mike just stated, Christ is our example here for this whole passage. Christ suffered for doing nothing wrong. But he was willing to absorb our sins. And for what purpose? But for the greater good. Because that was the only way out. But he was willing to do that. And if we take and look at that in the great scheme of things, and we have to, look what he did, all that he took on himself. And how much smaller is our little quabbles compared to that? We should, if we come into anything like this, we should be ashamed of ourselves for even thinking to that matter. It's like, yeah, the brother took $1 from me. I want my $1 back. Now I'm mad. I don't want to talk to him. Seriously?
Well, it's like a guy borrowed, a quarter from one guy. And 10 years later, he never got paid back. He said, and they were always enemies. He said, I wouldn't make peace with you for 2 bits. And that's just, let it go. It's the idea of going into an arbitration. He said, what are you going to say? I don't know what I'm going to say, but I'm not going to sin against the guy. I'm not going to say anything wrong. Whatever happens, I'm going to be innocent in the matter. And if I get defaulted, I still am not going to be the one that's guilty of saying something wrong or evil or something like that. I used to have to call up subcontractors. And I said, what am I going to say to them? Well, they owed us money. Or we, things like owed us something. They were not honoring their contract. Well, you're going to say to them, well, whatever I say to them on the phone, it's they're the one that's going to have to be saying something bad. I'm not going to be guilty of anything. So I could always feel good about calling them because I knew that at the end of the thing, I wouldn't have anything to be guilty about. So you accept wrong. You'd rather be blamed for something than have to go through the fight.
I like the verse in your example in 1 Peter. I think it gets to part of the heart of the matter is he did not revile in return when he suffered. He did not threaten, but he continued entrusting himself to him who judges justly. So that's the thing, is to trust God through these things. If something like that ever came up, to trust God, because He's the one that's going to judge between us. But as far as it is between me and somebody else, you turn the other cheek. Christ is the example of that.
Exactly. I think it's important, and I've seen it happen in other places. I've seen it in my own places I've worked. Somebody gets upset with the other person, and next thing you know, they're not talking to each other at all. Next thing you know, now all of a sudden they're talking bad about each other behind each other's backs, and all this is doing escalate. And it makes the whole place that these individuals are at not only hard to be there because of them, but then it leaves a bad stain on the business as a whole. And this is what we're talking about here. We've got brothers taking another brother to court over, and we don't know exactly what it is, probably money, because of the language that Paul used, but now it's leaving a stain on Christ. It's
And the
making
church.
it look bad for that church, exactly, and that church is representation of Christ. So how does it make Jesus look? How does it make God look? It makes those that are unbelievers want to do what?
Stay away.
Remain an unbeliever. There's no way I want to be part of that. Look what these people are doing, and we have to be careful with that. How are we representing God? How are we representing Jesus? How are we representing the local congregation? Are we behaving in manners that we shouldn't be? Are we keeping others from coming to Christ? I mean, it's not hard to do. It is a sense of being. We have to do who we are. If we're Christians, we have to behave like Christians, no matter where we're at. And tell the children as they were growing up that God sees everything. You can't hide from Him. You might be able to say things to this person over here, do these things over here, and think you got away with it. No, you didn't. God saw it. So, it's a good example we see here how to behave and not behave towards one another as brothers and sisters in Christ of trivial matters. Talk to each other. Sort it out in-house, if you will. Or find somebody that's even smarter in the congregation than we are, like, to sit down and negotiate. If you have to negotiate something, which it shouldn't be a negotiation, because I don't like that term, but stop the bickering and fighting, if that's what we're doing.
No, he takes the small thing and he turns around and says, look at what some of you were.
Exactly, and that was his whole point toward the end of the verse 9 through 11 about, look, this is what you were doing. He didn't say, maybe, no, he said some of you came from this, you were doing this. And now, this is what you want. It makes it seem so small of what they were guilty of at this point in time. It's like, let's take a step back, people. This is what you were, this is what you did. Do you want God to remember everything that you did do? Do you want God to not forgive? I'll tell you what, I'm glad He does. Because if He doesn't, we're all in trouble. Every one of us, there's no way to be saved. If He did not forgive us for things we did wrong. I think that's it.
Okay. Good job, man.
Hang on a second.
The Old Testament was written for our learning and admonition.
Yes.
And it had a way of judging between, reconciling differences. And it was among themselves.
Yes, it was.
Well, they had 613 laws that they had to.
Yeah.
Here, under the perfect law of liberty, there's a whole lot of difference.
There
The
is.
grace and privilege that we've had. So most people there were not, they didn't look at the old law, because they didn't have
Right.
a real handy access to it.
Exactly, yes. That's a good point.
That's part of the problem.
It is.